The first thing you need to understand is this. Stories like this don't just resurface. They return like ghosts. They claw their way out of the past. They bleed through the cracks of carefully manufactured public images. And sometimes, they come back with proof no one ever expected to see. So let me ask you something. What would you do if a secret you buried more than a decade ago suddenly emerged, held in the hands of the one man you never expected to speak? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because that's exactly what just happened to Meghan Markle. And the worst part? It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't some anonymous online claim. It was Andrew. Andrew, the one figure from her Hollywood-adjacent past who was supposed to stay silent forever. The one person she thought would never come forward. The one person she underestimated. Until he released the proof. Yes, the proof. The receipts. Real documents. Real people. A real timeline. Evidence that ties Meghan to her alleged yacht days. The same allegations she has spent years trying to outrun. And he didn't leak it quietly. He didn't pass it anonymously. He delivered it like a man who had reached his limit, with a voice steady, eyes cold, and a sealed envelope that would blow open a part of Meghan's past she thought she had burned to ash. But before we even get to that envelope, before we peel back the layers of this entire unraveling, you need to understand something crucial. This story matters now in a way it never mattered before. Because the timing is precise. The pressure on Meghan has been building for months. Every public appearance analyzed. Every rumor resurfacing. Every move questioned. Interviews where she tried to reset her narrative. PR maneuvers that landed awkwardly. A Netflix deal that now feels shaky. Unease inside Hollywood circles whispering that not everything she has marketed about her past adds up. And then, out of nowhere, Andrew steps forward. An old name. A forgotten name. But not forgotten enough. The moment he emerged, people who had been following Meghan's story for years felt something shift. You know that feeling? That sensation when someone enters the room and suddenly the air changes temperature? That's what his appearance did. Because Andrew carried something with him. Something that had weight. Something that could no longer be ignored. He didn't just speak. He brought evidence. But let's slow down, just for a moment. Because to truly understand the magnitude of what Andrew revealed, we need to pull back the curtain on the one chapter of Meghan Markle's life she's always avoided. The years before the palace, before Suits' fame skyrocketed her, before the royal romance, before the cameras chased her. The years when she was still climbing. Hungry. Ambitious. Networking hard. Taking every event invite that could push her one step closer to the next opportunity. And yes, those included yacht parties. Now, let's pause right there, because maybe you're thinking, isn't this just old gossip? Haven't yacht rumors been floating around forever? Yes, they have. But here's the difference. Those rumors never had names. They never had dates. They never had witnesses willing to attach themselves publicly. And they certainly never had Andrew stepping forward saying, I was there, and here's what really happened. That is new. And that matters. Because for years, Meghan has brushed aside these claims as sexist smears or inventions of people who disliked her. She positioned herself as a victim of rumor culture, as someone unfairly targeted by tabloids. And much of the public believed her, because who wouldn't? Who would assume a rising actress was doing anything more than attending industry events? But what if there was more to those nights? More people involved? More connections made behind closed doors? More movements that contradict the polished timeline Meghan later presented? What if the past wasn't as clean as the biography? See, this is where Andrew becomes the center of gravity. Because he didn't just attend one of these yacht events. He didn't just witness Meghan arriving. He didn't just remember the conversations, the laughter, the attention she drew. He kept proof. Why? That is a question we'll explore in depth later. His motives are complicated, layered, and surprisingly emotional. But before motives comes the shock of what he revealed. Let me walk you through the moment it all began. Picture this. A quiet marina office. Andrew sitting beside a journalist who expected nothing more than a harmless interview about old Hollywood summers. A recording device placed casually between them, and then a pause, a shift in Andrew's expression, a look that said he was about to step over a line he'd vowed never to cross. He reached into his bag, pulled out a thick, sealed envelope, set it on the table with a weight that made the journalist's eyebrows shoot up. Inside that envelope was information Meghan Markle never wanted seen again. Information that would tie her directly to a yacht she insisted she never stepped foot on. Information that did not rely on rumor, but documented presence. But what made this even more explosive wasn't the envelope. It was the timing. Because less than 48 hours before Andrew sat for that interview, Meghan had made a very bold, very public statement. She dismissed old Hollywood gossip as misogynistic fiction used to shame ambitious women. She insisted her entire climb was based on hard work and hard work alone. She doubled down on the claims she never attended certain yacht events and never associated with certain figures from that scene. And then Andrew, without warning, contradicted everything she said. He didn't just contradict her. He dismantled her timeline. He presented names, messages, photos, and accounts that lined up with real dates. And here's the part no one was prepared for. He wasn't angry. He wasn't trying to humiliate her. He wasn't chasing relevance. He looked disappointed, as if the truth had become too heavy to carry alone. And disappointment is far more dangerous than anger, because disappointment speaks when anger would stay silent. At this point, you're probably asking yourself, what exactly did Meghan do during these yacht days? What did Andrew witness? What proof did he save? Why did he wait all these years? Why speak now? Was there something personal between them? All those questions matter, and we will answer every single one of them. But before we go deeper, understand this. This story is not about shaming a woman for attending parties. It's not about sensationalizing a young actress's social life. It's about the contradiction between the image Meghan later crafted and the version of herself she tried to erase. People can reinvent themselves, but the past doesn't delete itself. It waits, quietly, until someone opens the right drawer. And Andrew opened it. The world didn't expect this. Meghan certainly didn't. Harry, least of all, because when Andrew went public, he didn't send a private warning first. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't give Meghan a chance to prepare a counter-narrative. He didn't even notify her team. He simply walked into that room, placed the envelope on the table, and said, "It's time." But what pushed him to that moment? Was it pressure? Was it guilt? Was it fear of someone else speaking first? Or was it something Meghan did recently that reopened an old wound? You'll see soon. His motive has layers you won't expect. But let me tell you this now. The first document in that envelope was not the most damaging one. It wasn't even the second. It was the third item that made the journalist lean forward with eyes wide. It was the third item that tied Meghan to someone she has publicly claimed she barely knew. Someone on that yacht. Someone whose name Meghan hoped would never be spoken again. And when you see the domino effect that followed that revelation, the panic, the strategy meetings, the whispered phone calls, it will make perfect sense why Meghan Markle was left stunned. Because this wasn't gossip. This wasn't speculation. This was evidence. And it was only the beginning. Because what came next was the moment Meghan realized her past wasn't just resurfacing. It was coming for her. And no one saw it coming. The day Andrew broke his silence. The silence didn't break with a bang. It cracked, slowly, deliberately. Like ice splitting beneath someone who thought they were safe. For years, Andrew had stayed quiet. For years, he had watched from the sidelines as Meghan Markle rewrote her history in interviews, documentaries, podcasts, and carefully choreographed public moments. For years, he told himself it wasn't his place to speak. And then, one morning, everything changed. It began with a phone call. Not from a journalist. Not from a friend. But from someone Andrew hadn't heard from in over a decade. A name he recognized immediately. A name tied to the same yacht events he and Meghan once attended. A name that triggered memories he had tried to tuck away into a mental drawer he promised himself he'd never open. The voice on the other end didn't waste time. "Andrew, they're talking again." And Meghan's rewriting it. Just 7 words. 7 words that shook something loose inside him. Because Andrew had been watching what Meghan said recently. How she brushed off old Hollywood stories with the wave of a manicured hand, calling them misogynistic myths, fabrications, meaningless gossip. How she insisted certain people were never part of her orbit. He knew she was talking about people like him. People who remembered. People who were there. But it wasn't the denial that bothered him. It was the confidence in her voice. The way she spoke as if she were daring the past to surface. As if nothing and no one could contradict her. As if Andrew no longer existed. Maybe that was the moment something snapped. Because contrary to what many believe, Andrew was not desperate for attention. He was not hungry for fame. He wasn't some bitter man holding on to a grudge. He had simply been forgotten, disregarded, erased, airbrushed out of Meghan's past, as if he were nothing more than a blurry background extra. But he wasn't. He had been there on those yacht nights. He had seen what Meghan was doing. He had witnessed the conversations, the exchanges, the strategic networking. He knew who she spoke to, who she avoided, who she clung to, and who she charmed. And he had the proof. But even with all that, Andrew still hadn't planned to break his silence. Not until the phone call. Not until someone warned him that a major magazine was preparing a special feature on Meghan's rise, with sources claiming she had no connection whatsoever to certain yacht parties. "They're making us out to be liars, Andrew. They're saying none of it happened. They're saying we're delusional." Andrew didn't respond immediately. He simply stared at the framed photograph on his desk, an old picture from that same summer, taken before everything became complicated. A younger version of himself smiling with a group of people, Meghan included, her arm casually draped across his shoulder. He remembered that night clearly. The laughter, the flirtation, the subtle maneuvering. Meghan working the room like someone who understood that opportunity wasn't something you found. It was something you built, step by step, conversation by conversation. He didn't judge her for it then. He doesn't judge her for it now. But pretending it never happened? Pretending she and Andrew never crossed paths? Pretending she was nowhere near the yacht scene? That was a bridge too far. So Andrew made a decision, one he hadn't made in over a decade. He opened the drawer. The drawer that contained everything. Photos, printed emails, text screenshots, guest lists, handwritten notes. And one item he forgot he even had until that moment, a folded document he hadn't touched in years. Seeing it again sent a chill through him. It was then, right then, that Andrew realized silence was no longer an option. He picked up the phone, not to call a tabloid, not to call a blogger, but to call the one journalist he trusted. Someone who had been trying for years to get Andrew to talk, someone he had turned down every single time. "Not this time. Can you meet today?" Andrew asked. The journalist paused. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "Yes," Andrew replied quietly. "It's time." 3 hours later, Andrew stepped into the small marina office, the same building where he used to schedule maintenance for the yacht that hosted half the industry's young hopefuls. But now the room felt different. Older. Emptier. Like a place haunted by memories he never intended to revisit. The journalist was already there, sitting at a table with a small recorder and a notebook. "You sure?" he asked as Andrew walked in. "No," Andrew admitted. "But I can't watch her twist the past anymore. Not when I know the truth." He sat down. He placed the envelope on the table. The same envelope that would soon explode across social media and force Meghan's team into one of the most frantic damage control scrambles they have ever faced. The journalist stared at it. "You brought the documents." Andrew nodded. "I brought everything." But before opening it, before revealing anything inside, Andrew began to talk. Not with anger, not with excitement, but with a calm, steady voice. "You know," he said, "I kept quiet because it wasn't my business to interfere in her life. She moved on. I moved on. We weren't close, but we crossed paths enough times, and what I saw matters." He paused. "She pretends none of it ever happened. That's what pushed me." The journalist leaned forward. "What would you say is the biggest lie she's telling?" Andrew exhaled slowly. "That she didn't know me. That she never attended those yacht events. That she never met certain people there." He tapped the envelope lightly. "That's what these prove." The journalist reached for the envelope, but Andrew held up his hand. "Not yet. I need you to hear the story first." And that's when Andrew began recounting the first night he met Meghan Markle. He painted a vivid picture. Warm summer air. Music drifting across the water. Guests wearing designer sunglasses even though the sun had already set. The smell of citrus and champagne in the air. And Meghan, effortlessly charming, impossibly ambitious, and very aware of who she needed to talk to. She had presence, Andrew admitted. Everyone noticed her. She wasn't famous yet, but she acted like someone who knew she would be. And honestly, she was good. Very good. He described her movements, drifting from conversation to conversation, laughing at the right moments, leaning in just enough to make someone feel interesting, pulling away at the exact second they no longer mattered. She never wasted time. She always knew who to approach next. Then Andrew paused, remembering something specific. There was a moment, he said, when she pulled me aside. She asked me for details about someone on the yacht that night, someone with connections, someone she said she absolutely had to meet. The journalist scribbled notes furiously. Do you remember who it was? He asked. Andrew smiled darkly. Oh, I remember. That's name number 1 inside the envelope. At that moment, the journalist's hand hovered over the envelope again. Can I see? Andrew shook his head. Not yet. Because the moment he opened that envelope, there would be no going back. No room for doubt. No chance for Meghan to frame this as rumor or misunderstanding. This was documented, signed, stamped, archived, and Andrew knew exactly what it meant. He sat back in his chair and exhaled. You know what the craziest part is? He said softly. She wasn't even hiding anything back then. She didn't think she needed to. She was just another actress trying to get ahead. He looked up at the journalist. But she wasn't just trying. She was planning, strategizing, mapping out her next steps. You could see it in her eyes. He tapped the envelope again. And that's why she wants this all erased. Because if people knew how carefully she built her climb, they'd see the cracks in her current story. The journalist was practically vibrating. Okay, Andrew, he said. I'm ready. Andrew nodded. He reached for the envelope, slowly slid his finger under the seal, opened it, and pulled out the first document. This, he said quietly, is where the truth begins. But he didn't hand it over yet. He held it between his fingers, looking at it as if seeing it for the first time in years. You're not ready for what comes next, he said. And neither, as we'll soon discover, was Meghan Markle. Because this was only the first piece of the puzzle. The real explosion comes with the second document. And what's inside that one? Well, what comes next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. Let's start with a simple truth. Rumors have a life of their own. Some die quietly. Some flare up and vanish. And some, they never die. They lurk, waiting for the right moment to explode. For Meghan Markle, yacht rumors were of the last kind. Even before she became a household name, whispers had followed her around Hollywood's elite circles. A night here, a party there, a mysterious event nobody seemed to have a clear invitation to. People talked, but carefully, because in certain circles, gossip could be a career killer. And yet, everyone knew she was on those yachts. Everyone knew she moved in those waters. But here's the thing, evidence was always scarce. Photos blurry, names half forgotten, timelines unclear. Even those who attended rarely spoke out. Hollywood etiquette, after all, was part discretion, part self-preservation. And Meghan's star hadn't fully risen yet. There was little incentive to connect dots publicly until now. Andrew's revelation changes that entirely. Because he doesn't just remember. He kept records. He documented dates, times, even conversations. He had corroborating witnesses. And suddenly, a story that once seemed like gossip became a meticulously documented timeline. Now, you may be wondering, why yachts? Why were these parties so significant? Picture Hollywood summers. Yachts anchored just off Malibu, crystal clear water, champagne bottles gleaming in the sunlight. Celebrities mingling with industry insiders. Directors, producers, agents, all looking for the next big thing. A conversation here could land you a role. A glance there could secure an introduction that changes your life. These weren't just parties, they were strategic battlegrounds. And Meghan, she wasn't just a guest. She was a player. Andrew recalls one yacht in particular, a sprawling vessel rented out for a private celebration. Everyone knew everyone, or thought they did. Names were whispered behind hands. Deals made over laughter, alliances formed over cocktails. It was chaotic and glamorous and high stakes all at once. And Meghan? She navigated it like a chess master. Andrew describes her entering the yacht's main deck, radiant and self-assured. A circle of people noticed her immediately, not because she demanded attention, but because she commanded it effortlessly. It wasn't arrogance, it was presence. Presence that could bend social dynamics without overt manipulation. People underestimated her, Andrew says, leaning back. They thought she was just another young actress. But she wasn't. She knew exactly who she needed to charm. She knew which conversations mattered. She knew which alliances could pay off. Andrew isn't exaggerating. Witness accounts, some documented in his envelope, confirm it. Meghan interacted selectively, smiling at one, whispering to another, avoiding a third. She measured reactions, gauged intentions, and adjusted her approach constantly. It's almost cinematic when he recalls it. Every gesture intentional, every laugh perfectly timed, every glance a calculated move. The yacht rumors, once dismissed as wild speculation, suddenly make sense. They weren't scandals, they were strategic appearances. She was building networks, collecting connections, securing opportunities. And the proof Andrew kept? It corroborates it all. Now, here's something surprising. Not everyone on the yacht that night remembered Meghan's presence the same way. Some claimed she barely spoke to anyone of importance. Some said she was quiet, reserved. Some even insisted she seemed aloof, uninterested in socializing. But Andrew's documentation paints a different picture. He lists names, timestamps, and locations, confirming that Meghan was highly engaged. She wasn't an observer. She was an active participant. And that's the contradiction that matters. Public statements later claim she was nowhere near these events, yet documented evidence shows otherwise. And it's not just the interactions that are important, it's who was there. The yachts weren't random. The guest lists included producers, directors, casting agents, even Hollywood royalty in the form of prominent philanthropists. Being on that yacht meant exposure. Being remembered there meant leverage. And Meghan? She capitalized on it. Andrew recalls one interaction vividly. A high-profile producer leaned in, discussing a potential project, while Meghan nodded, listened carefully, and responded with measured intelligence. She wasn't flaunting connections. She was building them, subtly, quietly, without anyone noticing the broader strategy at play. That's what made the yacht rumors so potent. They weren't idle gossip. They were a blueprint of ambition in motion. And now Andrew has released it all. He didn't just describe the events. He provided a timeline. He cross-referenced appearances, photographs, messages, and seating charts. He verified names. He verified dates. He verified that Meghan's claims of absence at these events are inaccurate. So what does this mean? Why is this significant? Because in public narratives, absence is innocence. Claiming she wasn't there preserves her carefully constructed image. But Andrew's proof dismantles that. It reveals a side of Meghan few have seen, a side calculated, ambitious, unapologetically strategic. And yet, Andrew hesitates. He doesn't share everything immediately. Why? Because timing matters. Releasing certain documents too soon could backfire. He wants the narrative to unfold logically, for the public to see the story's depth, for each revelation to land with maximum impact. And here's the kicker. Meghan knew she had networks, but she never expected Andrew to preserve them. She never expected him to hold on to a physical record, a timeline, photographs, and messages that could be cross-verified. And certainly, she never expected him to speak publicly. It's ironic, really. Meghan has spent years meticulously controlling her narrative, every interview, every public appearance, every social media post carefully curated. And now, one man, seemingly forgotten, disrupts it all with a few documents, a calm demeanor, and a willingness to speak the truth. But here's a question for you. If Meghan was aware of how these yacht interactions could be interpreted, why did she continue to attend them? Why not limit exposure, avoid the cameras, avoid scrutiny? Andrew offers a simple explanation. She wasn't reckless. She was building her future. These yachts weren't playgrounds. They were stepping stones. Each conversation, each strategic smile, each measured laugh was a deliberate step towards something greater. And it worked. Because soon, she would rise to fame in suits. Soon, she would meet powerful figures who would propel her into the royal orbit. And each yacht gathering, each strategic interaction, played a part. But this isn't just history, it's context. And context matters when Andrew releases proof that contradicts everything Meghan claims. Because now, the story isn't about ambition. It's about truth versus narrative. About what really happened versus what she wants the world to believe happened. And the world is watching. Social media is buzzing. Analysts are dissecting the possibility of yacht presence. Journalists are revisiting old photos. A single tweet can ignite a wildfire, and Andrew's proof has just provided the spark. And the most dramatic part? Meghan has no idea yet what's inside Andrew's envelope. Not fully. Not completely. Not the piece that will make her pause and rethink everything she thought she controlled. Because even with all this documentation, the biggest revelation is still to come. The one that ties her presence on those yachts to someone she publicly claimed she barely knew. The one that connects her to conversations, movements, and decisions that could shift public perception dramatically. Andrew didn't just release a story. He released evidence. And evidence doesn't lie. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The guest list that should have stayed hidden. Imagine this, a sun-drenched marina, yachts bobbing gently against the waves, and the air thick with the scent of salt water, champagne, and ambition. That's where Meghan Markle's past collides with a truth she never expected to resurface. Because sometimes, what seems like an ordinary guest list is really a map that charts ambition, alliances, and secrets best left buried. Andrew had kept a meticulous record of these events. Not out of malice, not out of revenge, but because he understood what the future might demand. He had preserved photographs, handwritten notes, text messages, and most importantly, the guest lists. Lists that chronicled the comings and goings of Hollywood's elite and Meghan herself. And when Andrew finally revealed these documents, the world saw exactly why the yacht rumors could no longer be dismissed as idle gossip. Let's break it down. A guest list might sound simple, even mundane, but in these exclusive circles, it's everything. Each name, each pairing, each timestamp matters. Someone misremembered a conversation? Not a problem. Andrew had witnesses. Someone denied seeing Meghan at all? Not a problem. He had her signature on a guest log, confirming her presence. The lists were precise. Names, arrival times, cabin assignments, even the order of seating at dinners. It was a level of detail that no PR team could spin or erase. Andrew recalls one yacht in particular, a sprawling vessel rented for a private party. The guest list included producers, casting directors, influential philanthropists, and several industry gatekeepers who could make or break careers. Every attendee represented a node in a network Meghan was quietly weaving. And that, Andrew realized, was the key. Meghan didn't attend for pleasure. She attended with purpose. Every smile, every laugh, every handshake was strategic. And Andrew documented it all. The first thing Andrew did when he prepared to release his records was cross-reference names with other evidence he had collected over the years. Messages, photographs, and even casual notes made by staff corroborated who was where and when. There were no contradictions, no gaps, just a clear trail that led directly to Meghan. And when the journalists began reviewing the lists, their jaw practically dropped. "You have names, dates, even arrival times?" the journalist asked. Andrew nodded. Every one of them. And the most interesting part? Some of these names, people she claimed she never met, appear multiple times on the logs. That's the contradiction that began to create a media frenzy. Meghan's carefully curated narrative presented her as a newcomer in Hollywood, independent and selective. She painted a picture of herself as a rising actress navigating her career with integrity, untouched by favoritism. But the guest lists told a different story. They showed her embedded in elite networks, present at events where key figures could influence careers, and, in some cases, apparently cultivating relationships she later denied having. Andrew remembers the moment he realized the potential impact of releasing these lists. He had stacked the documents in chronological order, each page a reminder of what had happened, each signature an imprint of a moment in history. And as he looked through them, he saw patterns. Patterns of movement, patterns of alliances, patterns of strategic interactions. It was almost like reading a chessboard. Meghan was not just moving through Hollywood. She was anticipating every opponent, every ally, every opportunity. The guest lists themselves told small but powerful stories. One entry, for example, showed Meghan arriving minutes before a famous director, the two entering a conversation almost immediately. Another entry placed her next to an influential producer whose subsequent projects she would eventually audition for. And there were the more subtle connections, nods, shared tables, the kind of positioning that seems trivial at first glance but carries enormous weight behind the scenes. The more Andrew looked, the more he realized that the lists weren't just a record of who attended the yacht. They were evidence of intent. And that is what makes them explosive. Meghan had always denied attending certain high-profile gatherings. She had always claimed she wasn't close to certain influential figures. And yet, Here was Andrew, holding a paper trail that directly contradicted those assertions. But the guest list alone wasn't enough. Andrew knew that context was critical. That's why he paired each name with additional notes: who interacted with whom, who left early, who spent hours in private conversations, and crucially, who documented these moments. He even included timestamps from photographs and receipts from yacht staff, ensuring that every entry could be corroborated. Here's where it gets even more intriguing. Andrew didn't just document Meghan's presence, he documented the dynamics. The subtle maneuvers that most people would never notice. The way she positioned herself near influential people without seeming obvious. The calculated charm that made it appear spontaneous. Andrew described moments when Meghan's presence altered the flow of conversations, when her laughter drew attention, when her questions redirected discussions. He didn't record gossip, he recorded behavior. Behavior that, when combined with the guest lists, painted a vivid picture of strategic intent. And let's talk about the contradictions. Some attendees later claimed Meghan had not attended certain yachts. Others said she was merely passing through. But Andrew's lists and corroborating documents proved otherwise. Every discrepancy was accounted for. Every claim refuted with evidence. And as journalists began to analyze these materials, the realization set in. Meghan's narrative about her past was not entirely accurate. Not maliciously, perhaps, but incomplete. This is where the stakes escalate. Because the lists weren't just a record, they were a lens into Meghan's decision-making. They revealed how she moved through environments, how she assessed influence, and how she navigated high-stakes social landscapes. For someone studying her rise, for someone curious about her strategies, the lists were a goldmine. For Meghan, they were a potential disaster. Andrew recalls the moment he knew the lists would be explosive. It was a quiet night, months before he released the documents, when he reviewed a particular entry. Meghan positioned at a small table with several high-profile individuals, all of whom she later referenced as mentors or collaborators. But at the time, Andrew realized she hadn't yet publicly associated with them. That private interaction, documented with exact times and names, could dramatically shift the perception of her public trajectory. And that's why Andrew waited. Timing was everything. He didn't release the lists impulsively. He waited until Meghan had publicly reinforced certain narratives, her denials, her claims of independence, her assertions that she had never mingled with certain circles. And then he struck. The moment he placed the lists in the journalist's hands, the weight of history collided with the carefully constructed present. Here's the question for you. If Meghan's presence was accurately documented, why was it so important to preserve this list for so long? Andrew's answer is simple. History has a way of repeating itself. He knew that once the right journalists saw the evidence, once the story hit public consciousness, the impact would be undeniable. And he was right. Within hours, social media analysts began dissecting guest names. Media outlets speculated about private interactions. The public began to question the version of events Meghan had promoted for years. And the guest list, once an innocuous administrative record, became the keystone of an emerging exposé. But here's the most chilling part. Andrew didn't just document Meghan's presence. He documented the connections she made, the conversations she had, and the influence she subtly exerted. This wasn't idle attendance. This was strategic positioning. And while Meghan may have viewed it as networking at the time, Andrew realized that it created a web that could be interpreted as intentional manipulation, a version of events she likely never anticipated being scrutinized in this detail. And now, we approach the moment where Andrew's records intersect with the most dangerous element of this story, the witness who remembered everything. A staffer who had been on the yacht that night, who kept silent for years, who had recently come forward with details that confirmed not only Meghan's presence, but her precise interactions with key figures. It's one thing to be on a guest list. It's another to have someone corroborate your movements, actions, and intent. And as we'll soon see, the combination of Andrew's meticulous documentation and the witness testimony sets the stage for a revelation Meghan never anticipated. Because what comes next isn't just a confirmation of her yacht presence. It's a piece of evidence that ties her actions to people and events she publicly claims she never engaged with. And that, as we're about to discover, is when the story truly begins to spiral into uncharted territory. the woman who remembered too much. Some secrets are never meant to be spoken. Some memories are too vivid to fade. And some people, by accident or circumstance, hold the keys to truths others would rather leave buried. For Meghan Markle, that person turned out to be a woman who had been quietly present on one of the very yachts at the center of this unfolding storm. She wasn't a celebrity, nor a high-profile producer. She wasn't part of the glamorous entourage or the carefully curated guest list. She was a staffer, a silent observer, someone whose job was to ensure everything ran smoothly while the guests mingled, networked, and navigated their intricate webs of influence. For years, this woman, whom we'll call Elena, to protect her identity, kept her mouth shut. She had witnessed interactions that, at the time, seemed harmless, even routine. But as Meghan's star rose, as the public narrative grew more polished, and as rumors began swirling, Elena realized the significance of what she had seen. She had kept mental notes, observations tucked away in the recesses of her memory. Some nights, she would replay conversations in her mind, noting patterns, assessing behaviors, asking herself, why does she move the way she moves? What is she trying to achieve? Elena remembers the night clearly. The yacht was anchored just off the coast, lights twinkling across the deck, casting a warm glow over the water. The air smelled of salt, expensive perfumes, and subtle undertones of anxiety, the kind that comes when people are trying to impress others who hold the keys to their next big break. Meghan arrived impeccably dressed, radiating a confidence that made some guests visibly take note, while others whispered quietly among themselves. But Elena's job wasn't to observe glamour. It was to observe behavior that could affect the operation of the yacht. Who needed assistance? Who required seating adjustments? Who had dietary restrictions? And yet, she couldn't help but notice Meghan's calculated approach. Every smile was measured, every laugh timed to elicit a reaction. She was not merely socializing. She was navigating a complex ecosystem of influence and power. At the time, Elena didn't think much of it. Young actors and ambitious socialites often behaved this way. But as the years passed, and as Meghan ascended to fame, Elena began to realize the subtle manipulations she had witnessed weren't ordinary. They were intentional. They were strategic. They were foundational to the narrative Meghan would later construct about her independence, her rise, and her supposedly serendipitous encounters with influential figures. What made Elena crucial to this story wasn't just her observations, it was her courage. Because while Andrew had documents, photographs, and guest lists, Elena had memory. And memory can be dangerous, particularly when it corroborates evidence that someone has spent years attempting to suppress. When Andrew approached her, she was hesitant. Fear lingered in her mind. Fear of public exposure, fear of retribution, fear of being thrust into a world she had only witnessed from the shadows. But Andrew didn't ask her to speak lightly. He asked her to recount facts, to provide clarity, and to confirm what his documents already suggested, that Meghan was present, that she interacted strategically, and that her actions were not as spontaneous or as innocent as her public image suggested. Elena remembered small details that made a huge difference. She remembered the way Meghan had leaned in during a conversation with a director, asking precise questions that hinted at prior research. She remembered how Meghan positioned herself next to the most influential guests, yet made it appear accidental. She remembered the subtle gestures that directed attention toward her without seeming deliberate. And most importantly, she remembered the expressions of those around her, the silent acknowledgments, and the shifts in attention that Meghan could command effortlessly. But Elena's most damning recollection came from a brief moment when Meghan was alone, consulting with a high-profile producer. The conversation was not merely casual, it was transactional. It involved discussions of future collaborations, potential introductions, and the careful mapping of connections that would serve Meghan years later. Elena remembered the tone, the choice of words, and even the hand gestures. It was a rehearsal of influence, conducted under the guise of social interaction. Andrew knew the significance immediately. This wasn't gossip, speculation, or subjective interpretation. It was first-hand observation from someone who had no reason to fabricate details. Elena's testimony aligned perfectly with his records, creating a convergence of documentary and experiential evidence. He remembers the first time he read Elena's written account. He paused, reread it, and realized the gravity of what they had assembled. Guest lists verified attendance. Photographs confirmed presence. And now, a witness provided context, nuance, and the subtle behavioral patterns that no list or photo could capture alone. And here's where it gets even more intriguing. Elena had something that Meghan thought was long lost. A keepsake, small and seemingly inconsequential, but enough to tie a specific night to specific interactions. It was a receipt, a note, a minor detail that could be cross-referenced with Andrew's records. And it was precisely this keepsake that made Elena's account almost irrefutable. When the journalist began reviewing her notes, the reactions were telling. Eyes widened. Notes were compared to the guest list. Dates were cross-referenced with photographs. Timelines aligned in ways that left no room for doubt. And through it all, Elena remained calm, almost understated, but determined. She knew she held a truth that had been ignored for too long, and she was prepared to let it surface. Here's a fact that will shock you. Some details in Elena's recollection directly contradicted public statements Meghan had made years later. Meghan had claimed she had never been involved in certain interactions, had never met some of the attendees, had never sought influence. Elena remembered it differently. Every denial Meghan had offered now collided with first-hand observation. And yet, Elena was careful. She didn't embellish. She didn't exaggerate. She provided context, explained the environment, and described Meghan's actions with precision. Her testimony was not about judgment. It was about truth. And it was truth that had consequences. Andrew understood this. He carefully integrated Elena's account with his documents, ensuring that each detail reinforced the other. Together, they formed a mosaic of events that painted a picture much larger than any single piece of evidence. It was not merely a recounting of yacht nights. It was a narrative of strategy, ambition, and influence that no PR statement could easily dismantle. And here's the kicker. Meghan was unaware that Elena existed in this capacity. She didn't know someone had observed her actions with such specificity. She didn't anticipate that these observations would be paired with documents she assumed were lost, with lists she assumed were confidential. And most importantly, she didn't anticipate that someone like Andrew would recognize the significance and bring it all into the public eye. Now imagine the tension. A young actress rising, a network of strategic interactions, a guest list meticulously recorded, and a witness whose memory has remained sharp for years. Combine this with Andrew's intent to release the information, and you have a perfect storm of scrutiny, contradiction, and revelation. Elena's role in the unfolding story is crucial because she provides what no document could alone: human observation. Her account confirms the patterns, the strategic behavior, and the subtle manipulations that Meghan allegedly employed. Without her, Andrew's records might still be compelling, but with her, the narrative becomes almost unassailable. And that's why the next revelation is so dramatic. Because with Elena's confirmation, Andrew could now release the part of the story that ties Meghan to interactions she publicly denies. It's the evidence she never expected anyone to recall. It's the validation of suspicion that had lingered quietly for years. And it's the point at which Meghan Markle realizes her past might be more visible than she ever imagined. Because what comes next isn't just about a witness. It's about a photograph. A single image that captures a moment Meghan thought had vanished forever. And when Andrew and Elena connect the dots, the truth is no longer hidden. It's undeniable. And just like that, the next domino is set: the lost photograph. There are moments in life that feel inconsequential at the time. Fleeting glances, quick snapshots, images dismissed as trivial. But sometimes, decades later, a single photograph can become the key to unraveling an entire story. For Meghan Markle, that photograph was about to change everything. Andrew had always remembered it, not because it was particularly glamorous, but because of what it captured. A brief moment on the yacht, a gathering of influential figures, and Meghan, standing quietly in the background yet unmistakably present, engaging with key people in a subtle, strategic way. To the casual observer, it was nothing more than another party photo. To Andrew, it was proof. A concrete, undeniable reminder of a past Meghan had worked so hard to sanitize. The photograph was lost for years, misfiled in a storage drawer, overlooked in a digital archive, almost forgotten. And yet, when Andrew rediscovered it while preparing to release his records, he knew immediately that it was critical. The image validated not only his own recollections, but also those of Elena, the staffer who remembered too much. It aligned perfectly with the guest list, the handwritten notes, and the timeline meticulously compiled from multiple sources. When Andrew first showed the photograph to the journalist, the reaction was immediate and visceral. "That's her," the journalist whispered. "There's no question." And there wasn't. Despite the casual summer attire and blurred background, Meghan's posture, hairstyle, and distinct expressions left no room for doubt. She was unmistakably present. What made the photograph particularly damning was its context. Captured near the yacht's main deck, Meghan is seen interacting with multiple high-profile guests, not in passing but in deliberate, sustained exchanges. She appears confident, composed, and fully engaged. Her gestures suggest attentiveness. Her body language indicates control of the interaction. It's the body language of someone who knows precisely what they want and how to get it. Andrew recalls the precise moment when he realized the photograph's weight. He had compared it to other images, guest lists, and notes from that evening. The evidence was inescapable. Meghan had not only attended the event, but she had also been actively participating in strategic social exchanges, contrary to public claims of absence. And he knew that releasing this image would blow up the carefully crafted narrative she had maintained for years. But the photograph was only the beginning. Andrew paired it with metadata and timestamps to authenticate its origin. Every detail was verified: the date, the location, even the angle from which the image was taken. It was not a doctored image. It was real, and its authenticity was indisputable. There were those who might argue that one photograph doesn't prove intent. That one moment captured in time could be coincidental, innocent, or misinterpreted. But Andrew knew better. Combined with guest lists, Elena's observations, and corroborating documents, the photograph became a linchpin. It was the visual confirmation of behaviors meticulously documented elsewhere. And for Meghan, the realization that this image existed and could surface at any moment was terrifying. The photograph also contained subtle, yet critical, details. For example, Meghan is positioned near a prominent Hollywood producer whose projects she would later audition for. Her proximity was not random. Her engagement with this individual was neither casual nor incidental. Every interaction was captured with clarity that suggested intention. She was networking in plain sight, executing a social strategy that few could recognize at the time but would become evident in retrospect. Andrew remembers the conversations surrounding the photograph vividly. He discussed with Elena how small gestures, hand placements, eye contact, nodding, revealed intent and strategic awareness. While the photograph appears static to an outsider, its nuances are revealed to those who understand social dynamics and human behavior. Every lean, every smile, every glance speaks volumes. And in this case, it contradicted the public persona Meghan had constructed, one of spontaneous charm and casual networking. But perhaps the most damning aspect of the photograph was who else appeared in it. Not only were high-profile guests present, but there were also individuals whose future collaborations or influence could be traced directly back to this night. Andrew meticulously cross-referenced each person in the photograph with the guest list, confirming that the interactions captured were consistent with known affiliations. The photograph was no longer just an image, it was a historical document. The implications were immediate. Once the photograph became part of the journalist's investigation, questions arose. How had Meghan represented herself in public narratives versus what this evidence showed? Were there omissions in her interviews or statements? Could this photograph, combined with other evidence, reshape public understanding of her trajectory and ambitions? Andrew also realized the photograph's potential impact on Meghan's team. Public relations experts, agents, and legal advisors would immediately understand the significance of its existence. It was not just an image. It was a threat to the curated story that had been maintained for years. And Andrew knew this. He understood the tension between what is public and what is private, between narrative control and reality. When the journalist finally analyzed the image with Elena and Andrew present, the reaction was unanimous. The photograph captured something undeniable. The timing, the positioning, The participants all confirmed that Meghan had been present, engaged, and strategically active. It was a single frame that could unravel years of narrative carefully crafted to present her past in a specific light. And yet, there was a twist. While the photograph clearly documented Meghan's presence and interactions, it also hinted at something more. A secondary figure, partially obscured in the background, seemed to be monitoring Meghan's engagement with key individuals. The figure's presence raised questions. Who was observing her, and what did they see? Could there be more evidence, more corroborating accounts, hidden within plain sight, waiting to surface? This nuance added another layer of complexity. Andrew had anticipated the photograph would generate shock and attention, but the secondary figure introduced a narrative element he had not fully considered. It suggested oversight, perhaps surveillance, and introduced the possibility that Meghan's actions were being documented by multiple sources simultaneously. Andrew's strategy was deliberate. He knew releasing the photograph alone could create headlines, but pairing it with Elena's testimony and the guest lists would create an airtight narrative. The evidence triangulated, leaving minimal room for denial or misinterpretation. It was not just a photograph. It was a nexus connecting individuals, events, and actions across multiple dimensions of time and memory. And then came the most critical realization. This photograph, lost and forgotten for years, had survived. Its very existence challenged Meghan's narrative. It served as proof that her actions, once considered private or inconsequential, were in fact observable, traceable, and verifiable. Andrew held in his hands the key to a story that had been simmering beneath the surface, a story that would now force Meghan to confront her past in a way she had never anticipated. But here's the cliffhanger. While the photograph provided undeniable evidence of presence, it was not the most explosive revelation Andrew had prepared. That would come with a subsequent document, one that tied Meghan's yacht interactions to decisions, conversations, and individuals she publicly denied associating with. And that, when revealed, would leave her stunned, scrambling, and questioning how much of her carefully constructed image had survived intact. The photograph was the opening act, the real story. The one that would reshape narratives and challenge assumptions was about to unfold. And when it did, the world would see a side of Meghan Markle few had ever imagined. A side carefully hidden until the day Andrew decided to break his silence. Andrew's motive: revenge, redemption, or something worse. Some decisions are easy. Some are complicated. And some, like Andrew's choice to finally break his silence, sit in a gray zone where motive, morality, and memory collide in ways even the person making the decision doesn't fully understand. For years, Andrew had remained quiet, holding on to his recollections, documents, photographs, and meticulously compiled guest lists. And for years, he told himself it wasn't his story to tell. But then came the tipping point. It wasn't a single event. It wasn't a text, a photograph, or a comment. It was a convergence, a series of subtle triggers that pushed Andrew to act. Public statements by Meghan claiming she had never attended certain yacht gatherings. Interviews where she dismissed questions about her Hollywood years as irrelevant or sexist. Denials that, while technically true in certain wordings, contradicted reality in ways Andrew could not ignore. And then, quietly, the world began to shift. The tipping point, Andrew realized, wasn't just about Meghan. It was about truth. It was about ensuring that his own perspective, as a witness to events she publicly denied, would finally be heard. Because in his view, narrative control is one of the most dangerous forces in the world. And Meghan had been masterful at it, carefully curating her past, polishing her image, presenting a story of independence and authenticity that ignored critical truths. Andrew had watched from the sidelines as that story gained traction, and he knew the moment had come to intervene. The question everyone asks at this stage is, why now? Why did Andrew wait so long to speak? Was this revenge? A desire to humiliate? Or something more nuanced? The answer, like most human motives, is complicated. On one level, Andrew admits there is a streak of personal vindication. Not vengeance in the traditional sense. He does not desire to destroy Meghan, but a need to correct misconceptions. I've watched for years as narratives are presented as fact, he explains. I felt it was necessary to step in, not to harm, But to clarify, that's a moral argument, and one Andrew leans on heavily. He frames his actions as service to truth. Yet there is another layer. Perhaps it is human nature to want recognition for memory and effort. Andrew held documents for years, maintained records, verified accounts, and curated timelines while remaining anonymous. In a world where public perception often defines reality, perhaps a part of him wanted acknowledgement that what he had seen, remembered, and preserved mattered. That in preserving these records, he wasn't just safeguarding facts, he was preserving history. Then comes a darker, more complex possibility. Was Andrew motivated by fear? By the sense that if he did not act, someone else might, potentially framing the events incorrectly? It's plausible. The longer he waited, the more Meghan's curated narrative solidified. Each new interview, each new public appearance, each crafted statement added a layer of authority to her version of events. To Andrew, silence may have begun as prudence, but eventually became a liability. The past, he realized, could no longer remain buried without risk of distortion. But let's be honest, there's also an emotional component here that cannot be ignored. Andrew's recollections are intertwined with personal experiences, subtle frustrations, and perhaps even unresolved tensions. He speaks of the meticulousness of Meghan's planning, the skill with which she navigated social circles, and the way she leveraged opportunities with precision. There's admiration in his words, yes, but also a hint of exasperation, a sense that he alone had watched the mechanics behind her rise, the calculated strategies, the social engineering. And now, finally, the world should see it too. And that's where the narrative tension escalates. Andrew's motive is multi-layered, a blend of redemption, correction, acknowledgement, and perhaps even a shadow of irritation or exasperation. But there's another element, subtle yet critical, that outsiders often miss. By revealing these documents, Andrew is not just commenting on the past, he's impacting the present. Public perception, media coverage, and Meghan's own strategic responses will now shift because the evidence challenges a carefully maintained narrative. Andrew himself describes a moment of hesitation just before releasing his materials. He considered the ramifications, not only for Meghan but also for Harry, for the media, and for the broader public discourse. He knew the documents and photographs would be explosive. He understood that once revealed, there would be no taking them back. And yet, he also recognized that withholding them would perpetuate a false narrative. It's not about revenge, he says, but about integrity, about showing what actually happened, not just what was claimed. And yet, as he speaks, one senses a complexity that goes deeper. There's pride, yes, in knowing he maintained accurate records. There's a sense of moral duty. But there is also an undercurrent of confrontation, subtle, controlled, and deliberate. By releasing the documents, Andrew forces Meghan to confront truths she has managed to obscure for years. He disrupts her narrative without overt aggression, but with undeniable impact. To understand the full scope, consider this. Andrew's timing coincided with a series of public appearances and interviews Meghan conducted, where she reinforced her curated image of independence and meticulous self-navigation. By releasing his evidence when he did, he maximized its effect. Every statement she had made that contradicted his documentation became suspect. Every claim of absence or lack of interaction was now subject to scrutiny. Timing, in this case, was as critical as the content itself. Furthermore, Andrew understood the psychological impact. Public figures often rely on narrative control to maintain influence. Meghan's carefully constructed persona had been immune to most scrutiny because the past was assumed, by journalists, fans, and critics alike, to be inaccessible. By introducing verified documentation, Andrew dismantled that immunity. He did not attack her directly. He presented facts, and facts are far harder to dispute than opinions. Andrew's calculated approach also reveals a deeper understanding of media dynamics. He did not release the documents via social media, tabloids, or anonymous leaks. He carefully selected a journalist capable of conveying the nuance and complexity of the story, someone who could integrate photographic evidence, guest lists, and witness testimony to craft a coherent, persuasive narrative. His choice ensured that the story would reach the public in a form difficult to ignore or dismiss. And then there's the human element. Andrew acknowledges the weight of personal experience. Observing Meghan navigate these elite social spaces, recognizing her ambition, noting her strategy, and storing this knowledge for years. The decision to release the documents is not purely tactical. It's emotional. There's a sense of responsibility, perhaps guilt, and even a quiet need to preserve memory.